is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and today we've got a very special guest calling into the show. Gavin Norman, the man behind Old School Essentials, is here to talk about Old School Essentials and so much more. So without further ado, the innovator of Old School, Gavin Norman.
Hey Gavin, thanks for joining us today.
Hello, how's it going?
Pretty good. I guess let's just jump right into it. You're the man behind the Old School Essentials rulebook box set. Since it's both, which do you prefer, the box set or the rule book?
It's actually a pretty interesting question because when I first developed it, I was all about the box set, the separate modular books. That was one of the kind of original points of the whole system to me, was to make this kind of modularized version of BX, which then you can kind of expand by adding different modules. So that led me to kind of develop the box set, which is the kind of obvious, okay, I've got these 5 books. What is the most awesome way to present those? Box set. But a lot of people were asking, is there an all-in-one version? And at first I was like, no, it's just a modular thing. But eventually enough people asked, I was like, okay, I'll do an all-in-one as well. And since actually getting the rules tome myself, I found is actually really useful as well. I use the modular books, like the box set I use at the table. So, I keep the monsters book behind the screen for myself, and you can pass the different individual books to the players to use. Essentially, you got one box, but, up to 5 people can be referring to different bits of the content at the same time. But for my own reference, when I'm planning games, designing adventures, this kind of thing, the rules tome is perfect. Just having everything in one book, not having to kind of flip between the separate books. So yeah, I was actually surprised that I like them both equally, but for different kind of purposes.
So let's take a step back. How did this whole thing come about? It started out as the BX Essentials, and now it's Old School Essentials.
Yeah.
And kind of walk me through why you decided to do this and then how it sort of evolved.
It's one of those things that when I was on the cusp of deciding to do it, I was like, no, this is crazy. I don't want to get into designing a whole retro clone. That's insane. That's so much work. But I did it anyway, and I'm glad I did. So it started off because I was playing Labyrinth Lord for many years, as I'm sure all listeners probably aware is another BX clone. And just using the books in my games for years, I noticed little things that I would improve, wouldn't it be nice if this was laid out like this, or if the monsters were had this bullet point thing going on, so it was easier to use during the heat of battle kind of thing. I remember a specific instance, we were playing Barrow Maze, and there was an encounter with zombies. We started running this combat, and then one of the players was like, oh, wait, don't zombies always lose initiative? And I was like, what? Read through the description of the zombie. I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. Crazy. I never noticed that. And it's because it's embedded in this big block of text that during the game, I'd never kind of picked that out. It was just little things like that that inspired me to think that there could be a book with the same content, but laid out in a kind of way that would make using it during play much easier as a reference. So at first, the project literally began as me cutting up the Labyrinth Lord rulebook. And I also wanted to make a kind of core rules version of the game. So in my own games, I often ditch all of the standard fantasy classes and spells, but I've run so many different campaigns using the BX or Labyrinth Lord rules. The kind of core rules stay the same, like the rules for combat, exploration, etc. But I switch in all sorts of different classes and things. The first thing was I was literally just kind of cutting up Labyrinth Lord and going these are the bits that are constant, these are the core rules, so that's going to be one booklet that I'll print out.
You're speaking metaphorically, right? You didn't actually cut the rule book up.
Digitally. Yeah,
okay.
Digitally. Yeah.
He means cut and paste.
Yeah. I was getting more and more horrified at the thought.
Yeah, that'd be pretty amazing. Take a saw to it. Yeah, so I got kind of far enough down that road and eventually was like, well, I'm doing this. Maybe other people would be interested in something like this. So I started talking to people about it it was Google Plus back then, and got a lot of kind of feedback from people that it sounded like a cool way to structure a system. This kind of modular aspect, splitting the content into kind of separate modular books, and the kind of focus on editing the text for like usability during play. Once I got a certain amount of interest going, then it became clear, okay, this isn't just something I'm doing for my own games. It's going to be a project. And then, of course, I kind of took it off on my own angle, away from it just being a hack of Labyrinth Lord into like a pure clone of BX without some of the changes that Labyrinth Lord makes. And obviously like writing a lot of the content myself again, rather than like just cut and pasting Labyrinth Lord.
So it's not so much a hack as it is sort of a direct clone of the original BX box sets.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
The problems that you solve, they're all in presentation, largely, right?
Yes. There's a few instances where the BX rules were ambiguous or unclear on certain points. I mean, it's an interesting one. There's obviously lots and lots of unclarity in old rule sets like that. Some of it I think is deliberate or is kind of valued by people who play the game, that it's open to interpretation and ruling. But some things are just kind of really confusing or possibly wrong. So stuff like that, I dug very, very deep into BX while I was developing this, and did actually kind of fix some of these things that are ambiguous. One specific example I remember is kind of a minor thing, but I was digging very deep into a lot of minor things like this. If you look in the expert set into the rules for water travel, in the equipment section, you've got all the ships listed, and it discusses different kind of stats about them. And then at the end of the book, you've got this kind of almost like an appendix of like the rules for water travel and ship combat. And there's some contradictions between those two sections. Like if you try and amalgamate all the information from those two sections into one, like here's everything about ships, it doesn't line up quite. So things like that I kind of noticed and was like, well, obviously I'm not just going to present this as is with these kind of contradictions. I'm going to, sort this out somehow. So things like that, wherever something came up that was obviously just wrong or really kind of, rules contradicting themselves, this kind of thing, I went in and made a judgment call on what seemed the most sensible way to fix that.
Do you feel like, specific to the seafaring rules, do you feel like you're the first person to ever notice that? I feel like one of the reasons why it was probably there is because it was not, something that was used very often.
To be honest, I've never noticed anyone else talking about this online. I've never come across any blog posts or whatever about it. I'd be interested in that actually, because, Steve Marsh is kind of active on Facebook and stuff in different communities. I wonder if he would have any memory of that. But yeah, to me, it feels kind of weird. Like it was almost like two sections of the book written by different people, and they just didn't quite line up, and the editing didn't catch that at the time. And yeah, like you say, I mean, those rules aren't so commonly used, are they really? Like ship combat, say. I'm trying to think if I've ever actually had a campaign where we've used those rules.
Well, I don't think many people have used ship rules in recent years until Saltmarsh came out for D&D in 5e.
Yeah, it's always like you have a boat, but, what are you going to do with the boat? You're just going to sail it.
You're going from A to B in the boat.
Yeah, maybe fight a sea monster.
If you're lucky.
Yeah. So are there any real differences between BX Essentials and Old School Essentials, or is it a repackage?
It started off as BX Essentials. Then I built up to the point where I knew that I wanted to do a sort of deluxe version. I wanted to run a Kickstarter and, get funds to hopefully produce this box set and a kind of, proper deluxe print run rather than print on demand, which BX Essentials was. When it came to kind of planning the deluxe version, I don't know, I guess this is common for anyone doing anything creative. Like, the minute you've finished the thing and it's like, yes, this is it, finish, release it. 5 minutes later, you're like, actually, I wish I'd done this different, or like I could improve that actually.
All these typos. How did I not see them before?
Yeah. Fortunately, not so many typos because there was a lot of community checking stuff all the way along. But yeah, like in the kind of year between finishing BX Essentials and seriously starting Old School Essentials, I had a lot more ideas of how to improve it further. So the biggest difference is the core rules. So in BX Essentials, the core rules, I can't remember why I made this decision, but it's ordered alphabetically. So I don't know, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but you'd have like a weird ordering of rules, that the rules aren't ordered in some kind of order that makes sense in terms of referring to them. It's just like, okay, here's something that starts with A. Like, I think if you turn to the first thing in core rules, I think is like aerial combat.
Okay, I
Which is
gotcha.
a super random thing, like really obscure, and like is definitely not the first thing you would want in a rule book, right?
Yeah.
So that was one big thing that I decided to order it more in a kind of more natural order of like making a character maybe should be the first thing. And like, the basics of like, here are the stats that make up a character. Here's how you roll the ability scores, here's the whole kind of procedure for making a character. And then going on to, dungeon exploration, wilderness travel, stuff like this. So that's the biggest difference. Just the way the information in the core rules is structured is completely different between BX and old school essentials.
I've not ever actually read BX Essentials, but did you have Ascending Armor Class and Thaco in that? Or was that an addition for old school?
Looking at reviews, like comments on reviews, so many people would say like, oh yeah, it looks really cool. Reviews of BX Essentials, looks really cool, but I'm never going to play a game that has Descending Armor Class. After reading such comments enough times, I was like, well, it's actually pretty easy to add it as an option. So I just went ahead and did that.
It's really interesting to me that that's such a clear dividing line in the sand. There's old school folks who are just like, I will never use Ascending Armor Class because I learned this stupid system that's really hard to like do off the top of your head. And then there's people who are just like, I'm never going to learn this slide rule Thaco or the combat matrices ever. There's not a lot of overlap there, I feel like.
Hey man, some people are just not wacko for Thaco.
Oh, you guys call it Thaco? I've heard a lot of variations over the years of Thaco.
It's the only way I can make that line rhyme, so
yeah, exactly.
Just go with it.
Yeah.
I'm a Thaco person, even though I'm pretty sure it should be Thaco.
What does Thaco rhyme with, though?
Mako?
Waco, Texas? I don't know.
Yeah, that's about the only thing, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm Waco for Thaco.
That's a whole different...
Weird party.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the things I think that is the biggest accomplishment for old school essentials is the way that you've created, I think you call them control panels at some point in the text.
Right.
And like those pages, the layout and the way you just have parsed the information and presented it, it like shoots directly into your brain. It's almost like impossible to not learn the rules if you flip through it. How did you stumble upon this sort of mystical way of presenting rules? Because I can't think of any other system that just instantly beamed into my brain this way.
One of the things was, thinking back to the origins of the project in Labyrinth Lord and in the original BX rules. I remember things like, it's especially bad in BX, obviously, because it's split between the two books, Basic and Expert. I remember like looking up, okay, everything about the dwarf class. If I'm playing a dwarf, what do I need to look at? And it's like, I don't know, in BX, it's something crazy, like 10 different pages or something like that, split over two books, mention like abilities or different stats to do with dwarves. And I was just like, no, that's crazy. Like, I can just put all that on one page. Easy. Just kind of noticing things like that. It just led me down that path of like collating everything, everything related to one topic, bringing it all together, like unraveling the kind of spaghetti and
That's a good
making nice like dumplings instead.
Sounds delicious.
It does. It's really interesting to me because all those old rule sets were presented that way. And I think that it took a long time before people sort of shifted their presentation philosophy. Not too long ago, we played the Beckme Basic, and it was just such a nightmare. Not only are they split across different boxes and different rule books, but there was no index. That was what really stopped the game for us. We couldn't continue because we couldn't find the rules that we wanted to know.
I think in a way, those old rule sets rely on you being a super dedicated reader with a good memory. Like, I remember when I was a kid, like just reading D&D books was a hobby in itself, like just sitting there in any spare moment, just reading through them just as a pleasure, not as a kind of, I've got to learn the rules to play the game. So I think that's maybe the sort of assumption that that's how people are going to use these books. So in the kind of original like layout and information design, they weren't really considering like, how to present this information as a quick reference,
I recently read the Greyhawk supplement for the White Box. And I hadn't read the White Box in a long time, but Greyhawk was very much like the notes for a lecture. You know, it has like this flow, and if it was spoken, it would probably be very engaging and interesting.
Yeah.
And like they talk about why they change rules and stuff, but like it's really hard to sort of separate the text from the actual rules. And it's interesting to me that it took so long before somebody realized.
Right.
But thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. I'm not sure like of the history of this kind of like usability focused layout. I mean, I know now in the kind of old school scene, a lot of people are getting more and more into this. You know, Mothership, for example. I've not actually seen it. I think I've just seen a few kind of example kind of shots of the pages. But like I know they're also really focused on these like control panels and like everything being on one page or one spread and kind of information design. I don't actually know how far that goes back, if it's really a new thing or like, you know, if you would go back to the 90s, say, there would be older examples of that in different games.
There are some forerunners. I feel like Chaosium stuff is generally more condensed and easier, but it still kind of takes that I'm talking to you text feel. I can't really think of anything that is on that level. Black Hack is another one.
Yeah, Black Hack is a good example, yeah.
All of them are very recent, I feel like. It's like the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a sort of trend in the old school scene, you know, that people are now talking about this, and that then encourages other people to kind of design their games or adventures that way. You know, Questing Beast is a big proponent of this. I think he's a big influence. And Bryce Lynch, the 10-foot pole reviews, he's also like massive on this kind of usability of text. So I think his reviews actually were a big influence on me. He's talking about adventures. Old School Essentials is a game rather than adventure, but like just taking the principles of what he talks about, how to make the text as kind of play friendly as possible by editing and layout.
And I think that's super interesting too, because like right now we're very much at a, you know, a D&D 5th edition moment where it's all about, you know, bringing more people into the hobby and being as accessible as possible. But again, 5th edition rules, those books are still structured in that way. You know, there's just so much less barrier to entry when we strip out all that text.
Yeah, that is the weird thing, isn't it? Like there seems to be this kind of, I don't know what it is, if it's a conscious thing somehow, or if it's just an unconscious assumption that like, you know, people want these huge, thick rule books with like really like verbose text and not especially caring about information design.
Well, I think it's a very American way of putting out a product where bigger
is better.
And thicker, larger equates more value to it. You know, whereas, you know, the books that you make are stunning. They're great and they're super easy to thumb through and to pick up the game just as you go. You know, I can see where there is the break in messaging where like, hey, 5th edition is so accessible, it's so easy for everyone to get into, but here is this textbook, which is one of 3, which is your book, which is a little skinny book that has a lot of information in it that's easy to digest and easy to, like, if I read it cover to cover, I'm very confident that I could run one of your games at the snap of a finger.
I was so surprised when I opened the box and felt those books in my hand. Like, they were just so comfortable. I know that when RuneQuest started doing like the Hero Wars games and like they tried to use the digest size books for role-playing games, and like it failed totally. They thought that they would get more in bookstores, that it would be more bookstore friendly, but people who buy role-playing books were just like, no, it's not big. It's not like that 8.5 by 11.
Yeah, we want big fancy hardbacks, yeah.
But I think that's shifted. And even now with the Young Adventurers guides. Yeah, there's something about having that small book.
Oh, are they digest size?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Ah, okay, right. I've not seen them. I've just kind of heard of them online. Right, that's cool. Yeah, actually, because in D&D 4, they also had the Essentials, didn't they? And that was trade or digest size.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But a lot smaller.
Yeah, they were definitely smaller.
Like 6 by 9, I think, maybe something like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I do think that the Young Adventurers guides have something similar in approach to Old School Essentials in terms of the way it transmits the information. Because it's totally not rules, but it's like philosophical. It's like the philosophical equivalent of just like transmitting like how to play role-playing games, how to think about role-playing games.
And I think that especially because they are geared towards children and they're aimed at younger readers, I mean, we could see a change in the future where, the old guard is getting older and the people who are going to be buying these books are going to be growing up with not so much, this is not your father's player's handbook.
Yeah.
This is this digest size young adventurers
Yeah.
guides. And maybe that's the way going forward for the next generations, that kids are going to get into the hobby more.
Yeah, true. I guess that's the thing with different editions of D&D that have come out over the years. You see this gradual kind of drift, don't you? Like new things being introduced. Like an obvious one in D&D 5 that's a big thing is the kind of inclusivity of like different genders, sexuality, stuff like that. Which, if you go back to really old D&D, like AD&D first edition, that wasn't a thing at all. I mean, obviously you could take your own game in whatever direction you want, but now that is explicit in the rule books, like definitely the kind of different editions have different kind of emphasis on things which are important to the new generation, which is kind of getting into the game.
And I think that's important because I think that in a lot of ways, yeah, it is heavy-handed and it is explicit because it has to be. It has to really put out the signal to everyone that says, hey, don't believe the hype. You're all invited. Come on, let's party.
Yeah.
And that's great.
So I've had Wormskin recommended to me for several years now, and I never quite understood why or what it was. And people were just like, this is great, you got to read it. And I was just like, it's print on demand and I'll get it eventually. And then you came out with Old School Essentials, and I realized that it's the same person. I need to see how this applies to adventures and campaign setting. And my goodness, I kind of have been toying with the idea of putting together like a campaign setting book, and I have no desire now. I read those Wormskin books, and I'm just like, I want the Dolmenwood book to come out, and that's all I want. I don't...
Wow, amazing. Set for life.
Exactly, yeah. So how did you start Dolmenwood? What was the initial idea that made Dolmenwood come to be?
So this is going back, I guess, 5-6 years now. Do you remember the Petty Gods project? The big tome of old school crowdsourced deities and followers and so on.
I don't.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, you should totally check that out. It's amazing. It's like massive tome in the end. It took some years to actually see the light of day, but it's like, I don't know, 300-400 pages of crazy deities, all crowdsourced by old school people.
Oh, wow.
So it was started by James Malé, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Sevsky. I think I've never actually said his name out loud before. Sorry, James. Yeah.
We'll apologize profusely in the show notes.
Yeah, so it was started by him, and then later on Greg Gorgonmilk of the Gorgonmilk blog kind of took over the torch. And then after him, Richard LeBlanc took over the torch and brought it to the finish line. So it's quite a major undertaking. I was kind of contributing some stuff to it when Greg Gorgonmilk was the helm. We just kind of got chatting, we were sending emails back and forth about these different weird deities and things. And then he just said one day, oh, hey, I really like the stuff you're writing. How about we make some sort of adventure or campaign setting together? And we had a list of a few different possible ideas. And the one that kind of resonated with both of us was just 2 words, haunted forest. Oh, no, sorry, 3 words, monster haunted forest. That was the seed of it. So then, we just kind of started chatting over email, elaborating different kind of factions and cults and things that might live in this forest. That was the kind of genesis of the idea. Yeah, originally we were planning to just write it and publish it as a campaign book, which ironically is that's what I'm doing now, 5 years later, something. But it got to a point, it was one of these projects where the kind of initial idea was quite modest, but the more we got into it, the bigger it became. After a year or so of this, I was like, this is never going to happen. Let's just publish little bits at a time as a zine, rather than having this aim of publishing some huge book. That was how Wormskin started, just as a way of publishing bits and pieces that we'd already written up about this setting, rather than trying to create this huge campaign book from nothing.
And it's interesting, too, because Wormskin is fairly brief, but detailed. And it kind of echoes the modularity of Old School Essentials, because by putting these small volumes out, like, it's so tantalizing. And it's almost like you always stop right before I get to the good bit. And I'm just like, oh, I need more. Like, I want to know more about this unicorn. And we never got there. That's just me as a reader. But on top of it, it's sort of interesting to approach a campaign setting that way, because you don't have the totality of it as somebody who might run it. So that forces you to kind of just, well, I'm going to do this on the fly.
Yeah, take it in your own direction.
Yeah, even though that might directly contradict what comes out, next month or in the book.
Yeah, I think in terms of, splitting things into these little chunks, it has something in common with Old School Essentials. In terms of usability, I think they're opposite ends of the spectrum almost. Wormskin and Old School Essentials. Essentially, the contents of each issue of Wormskin are random. There wasn't anything systematic, like, okay, first we will present all the classes, that will be issues 1 and 2. Next, we will present all the monsters, that will be issues 3, 4, 5, whatever. It's just random scattershot, like, oh, hey, I've written up this monster, let's include that. Oh, hey, I've written up this spell, let's chuck that in there.
Yeah, because Fungus is the first issue, right?
Right. It's like you go in at the lowest level. It's like a bottom-up setting. You're just thrown straight into and here are some crazy mushrooms, without any introduction to the setting.
Yeah. And then you build on that later with the psychotropics, I think in the next issue or issue 3. And it's interesting. And I wonder how I would have felt about it if I was getting them every, they were quarterly, right? So every 3 months, I might be less well disposed to it. Having all 8 of them at once was very nice.
Yeah, I think once you've got the 8 existing issues, then it fills in enough of the kind of picture of the setting that you can get a feeling for it. But I think definitely if you were just okay, there's this Wormskin thing, issue 1, go. It's pretty baffling. I mean, kind of intriguing, I hope. But yeah, honestly, it's not how I would approach a project again. It was really fun at the time, but it's not the kind of way I would publish something again in the future.
Well, speaking of the future, how is the Dolmenwood book shaping up now?
It's a slow process. I basically have to keep resigning myself to it's finished when it's finished, rather than saying, okay, in May it's going to be finished. Boom. It's just going to take as long as it takes.
So it's not going to be finished in May.
No.
Damn.
No, sorry, definitely not. Yeah, I mean, there's such a huge amount of content, and at this stage, I have very high kind of standards of how I want to present that information. It's just a huge amount of work, especially editing and layout work now. But it's going amazing, though. I love it. It's been a project I've been working on for years now, if you include all the development of Wormskin. And so, I've had waxing and waning of my enthusiasm for it. But now I'm at this kind of final stage of actually putting it all together. Let's make a book. I'm so happy with how it's turning out. I really hope other people will be. I think in a way it's Wormskin gives you these kind of, as you said, tantalizing kind of promises of something, but then it leaves things a bit bit vague somehow. I hope the campaign book fulfills that promise,
Will we be getting details on the entirety of the forest, every hex?
Yes. Yeah. So that's probably one of the biggest things. So it covers every hex in the forest. I think in Wormskin there was 49 maybe covered, which is, it's a fair amount. But if you look at it on the map, I've got a map printed out with yellow highlighter in each hex that is described in Wormskin. And it's not many. When you look at it on the scale of the whole forest, it's not many.
I'm surprised that it's that many. I feel like I got just such a small slice in the magazine.
Yeah. I think it's issue 6 or 7, it goes crazy and includes 20 odd more hexes. Because at that stage, I just realized the hex descriptions are the real meat of the thing and that we needed to get more of them out there. So I just kind of went nuts and wrote up loads of them for that issue. But the campaign book will have, can't remember the exact number, it's over 180 hex descriptions on the map. So it covers the whole forest. Yeah, so it's going to be 2 books. So the player's book, which details all of the character classes, loads of crazy kind of equipment, including nice sections on weird herbs and mushrooms, different kinds of dogs you can buy in Dolmenwood. What else? Pipeweeds. There's a whole 2 pages on different kinds of pipeweed. So it's good. It's got all that kind of lovely, quirky kind of flavor stuff from Wormskin. That a lot of that is in the player's book, and obviously kind of sections about like different kinds of magic, like the magic of fairies and stuff like that. So that's finished. I'd say like 99% finished in terms of writing and layout. Not much art yet, but that will come slowly. And that's like 108 pages, I think, something like that. So just the player's book is a decent sized book in itself. Then the campaign book, this is what I'm kind of currently diving into, the layout and editing on that. It can be overwhelming, like there's so much material. But for the campaign book, I've got a document where there's like essentially a placeholder for each section in the book. And then I'm just gradually going through and filling in each section. So essentially, I've got like a kind of checklist, which for me is a helpful way of doing it. It keeps kind of focus on how the document should be structured and, what is done and what is still to do. It's a lot of work, but I'm really, really happy with how it's going. And like today, for example, I was doing some work on some changes to the Dolmenwood map. So I've commissioned a new map, which is going to have a lot more kind of information on it than the old one had. So I was going through preparing some kind of instructions for the cartographer, like, where the roads should go, how they should be depicted, this kind of thing. And like, diving back into some of the older material that I've not looked at for ages, I was actually like, whoa, amazing. This is so good. I can't wait to, actually get this published.
And so it will use the old school essentials as its assumed rule set?
Yes.
Excellent.
The Dolmenwood books won't actually be like branded. They won't use the kind of old school essentials trade dress. So they won't say old school essentials on the cover. But inside it says requires a basic expert derived rule set, for example, old school essentials. Because, of course, you could use it with BX or you could use it with Labyrinth Lord, etc.
And hopefully coming to Kickstarter this year?
Yes, that's the hope. As I said, it's really just going to be finished when it's finished. But I think the end of this year, that should be completely viable. I was originally kind of planning for this spring, but it's basically spring now and it's nowhere near finished. So,
all right, Gavin, is there anything else you want to talk about before we go home? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, there is one other thing that I've been working on in the background. When I'm working on a big project like Dolmenwood at the moment is the big project, I can't just have that one thing. Like I have to have a little side thing going on. Just, there are days where I'm just like, oh God, Dolmenwood, no. I can't bear to look at Dolmenwood. So I need something else.
Hey man, side quests keep you sane.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, I need something else to work on days like that. So what I've been working on recently is a new old school essentials book.
Ooh.
My eyes just bugged out of my head.
This is actually a kind of news scoop. I've not announced this yet, so this
Ooh,
is kind of
exclusive.
kind of an announcement, I guess. Yeah.
Yay.
So there's the classic fantasy books, then there's the advanced fantasy books. So you've got the advanced fantasy genre rules and the druid and illusionist spells. What I've been working on is the next in that set, which is the advanced monsters book.
Ooh.
Yes.
This is a book of monsters in the old school essentials format, but all like inspired by AD&D monsters.
Excellent.
So it's got loads of those nice kind of crazy like Zorn and Yetis and like hags and I don't know, gibbering mouthers, all that kind of crazy stuff from AD&D that never made it into BX back in the day. The layout is about a third done, so it's actually quite far along now. And I've started commissioning art for it. So maybe this summer, maybe.
So
That's
exciting.
awesome.
So that's my kind of side project.
I didn't even have an inkling that was a thing, and now I'm just so excited.
There's going to be advanced fantasy treasures as well. Will be the last one. So bringing in the AD&D magic items, and that'll be the complete set then.
Will all of those fit in the box?
No, unfortunately not. The box would need to be about twice as high as it is to fit them all. Yeah, I mean, once all of those 4 are finished, there may be, I've got the idea anyway of maybe doing a box set including those, which obviously would be a bigger box, or maybe even a kind of tome combining all of those would be like of biblical proportions. I think like 2 inches thick, but I don't know. We'll see.
Very cool. And where can our listeners find you online?
So the website is necroticgnome.com. That's where you can buy all our products, and there's a kind of news feed there where I announce things and discuss different stuff. Also, we've got a Facebook community for Old School Essentials, which is really active. There's like 1,100 members and a lot of discussion there. Also Discord and MeWe communities we have, and all kind of social media, Twitter, Instagram, etc. There's Necrotic Gnome accounts. So yeah, come and join us.
Hell yeah, man. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, and we cannot wait for everything that's coming out.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. Great talking to you guys.
Thanks to Gavin Norman for calling into the show, and thank you all so much for listening. I hope everyone is safe out there during this pandemic, and I hope that you're all rolling as many dice as you can, and they're all rolling crits. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.